Carl, good evening.
Good evening.
Hope you've
Episode
had,
16.
yeah, I know it. We're going to get up here before too long that it's going to get beyond my ability to either count or remember. So,
Well,
but
I've
that's
only
good.
got four more fingers and toes to be, so we're gonna run out of my range soon.
Uh, but
Still hadn't gotten the
anyway,
calls yet. I haven't. I drank that Michelob Ultra while I was in Orlando. Nobody's called exorbitant amounts of money yet, but I think that's coming.
not yet. But the right people just haven't
Episode
checked
100.
in yet.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we'll see. But I've got on again, as we were talking earlier. My
Yep.
Ecuador football team upset the day
Yep.
and made it in the knockout round. I don't know
Yeah.
who they'll be playing, probably the US or
That
someone,
would
but
be awesome if they played. You have to
that would be really
decide.
cool. I can tell you though that Cuenca went absolutely crazy today.
What I can tell
Fireworks
you
going
from
off and
time I
everything.
used to spend in Mexico, World Cup. This would have been in the early 2000s. It'd be easy to find if we went and looked it up, but it was early 2000s, and the U.S. upset Mexico. Happened to be in Guadalajara.
Wow.
I decided that I would say something to my friends when I went into the office the next morning, jokingly, and I didn't even know how to spell
Mm.
soccer back then. Didn't care about soccer. I read it as a headline and thought I would say something, and they were not happy about it.
No.
Turns out they take it a lot more seriously than I did.
Hmm.
It was not a joking matter because words, the U.S. sucks at soccer and should not win and should not have beat them. And they were
Right.
right. Well, then what was funny, so we had a conversation about it and, their expectations. We had to, in the plants down there, either the employees would not show up to work or you would have to put large TVs all over the production floor and everything so they could watch it, going
Yeah.
to watch it. So you either helped them
Right.
watch it or they were not coming to work. So that was what
Yeah.
we did. And again, I was down there one time when Guadalajara played Mexico City, and they explained it to me like, Mexico City is the Yankees and Guadalajara is some
Right.
small market team. And so it's same thing. The city square and the roundabouts, I mean, it was a
Hmm.
party until late that night. So it was awesome. That was my first understanding of how big and what a part of the culture it is.
Right.
What was really funny though is I don't know, it was the World Baseball Classic or something a year or two after we upset them in the World Cup. Mexico put the US out. And so I'm down there again. And so they start telling me, they're giving me grief about it. And I said, here's the difference. I really don't care. You guys actually, in Colombia and other teams who care a lot about soccer will shoot your own players if they score on the wrong goal when they get off the plane.
Right.
I didn't even barely know the U.S. was playing in the World Baseball Classic, and I don't care. So there's the reason our soccer team is very good is we send them out with a lot of very little expectation. With so
No,
my
that's
favorite
true.
thing with this world, we've talked just more and more stories coming out about from Europe and the world, but specifically a lot of Europeans, and what they think about us. They're confused by some things. The food portions blows their mind. The unlimited refills and no ice. They get to get ice and refills is they like that. Bucky's absolutely blows their mind. They
Right.
don't know what to think
Right.
about an amusement park with a gas station and food. The cool thing though is I heard today that a lady said, I think we were lied to. She said, I think it was a lot of your media who actually lied to it. The U.S. was. I'm like, that's should be a pretty good indictment that
Hmm. Oh
our
yeah.
own media is painting a picture of our country across the world that makes us look really, really bad. So the good news
Right.
is when people get to experience it, they're finding out that it's a pretty special place with a collection of nice people. So it's good.
Well, I think this right now is really good. I'm hoping that the next Olympics will prove to be
I agree.
similar,
Yep.
at least the ones when we have them in LA.
Yep.
It's the attendance is unbelievable, for one thing.
Yep.
There,
I was talking. I think the U.S. is one for FIFA and the rest of the world though. Is we're so stupid that we pay a lot of money for sporting events. And
right.
I think the price of FIFA World Cup tickets, no matter where it goes, has just gone through the roof because they realize
Yeah,
that people will
that's
pay it
probably true.
because of us. And so I think that's
Right.
probably not going to be great for everybody. So it's
No,
cool
I
though.
think
It's good to see people
it's good.
experience it.
Right. It's good that people in the U.S. who are on the periphery of soccer or football, begin, they're beginning to see what a big deal this is.
Yeah.
Certainly, it helps for all of the people from Europe and South and Central America and Asia to be able to experience this in the US. I think you're gonna
Yeah.
see, a continued growth and probably a good boost, for
Yeah.
soccer in the United States as a result of this, and that's a
Well, I
good
think
thing.
what I heard a really good breakdown of kind of soccer in the US and the growth of it. And I was talking to somebody about this earlier this week that knows a lot more about soccer than I do. But it's interesting if you look and when it started, everybody said, "Oh, that's crazy. I can't believe they're paying him that much money." But David Beckham was the foundational piece of American soccer that really started the popularity. They paid him a
Mhm.
crap ton of money. He's a billionaire now and deserves to be. Without him, there is no MLS. And so he was
Right.
a guy who's retiring and, played a few show games toward the end of his career. The next step was getting Messi to Inter
Messi,
Miami,
yeah,
who
sure.
is at the end of his career, but he's still got some years left. And then they said the final step for American soccer to be on a world stage equal on par and the MLS to be on par with what some of these other are is they're going to have to sign somebody like Mbappe, who's at the beginning, 2 years into their career in their prime. You got to sign that player and pay them
Yeah,
more money than they paid Messi and Beckham. And then all of a sudden we'll be a soccer country. But that's kind of the final
right,
step. I thought that was pretty
yeah.
cool. And I think that's accurate.
And
So
we'll get there. We've certainly got the funding to do it.
it's a
Heck, you got,
beautiful game. I mean, I had
you've
no
got
I used to kid my buddies in college that played it, and, I was like, "This is like watching the grass grow, it's terrible."
right.
They would say the same thing to me when I used to watch NASCAR, but I didn't understand soccer. Now that I understand
Mhm,
it and I've been around it for, the last 13, 14 years, traveled all over the dang country, it's beautiful. It's a very fun game to
yeah,
watch, and when you really understand the strategy, it is a lot of a chess match and all the things that go on to watch. It's pretty neat, pretty cool. You do with the crowds what you've seen with the Dutch and the Scottish and the culture is phenomenal. I
right,
mean, it's like college
yeah.
football on a world stage. It's the
Yes,
same, the
right.
passion and the pageantry around the games. It's pretty dang cool.
Yes, and, so no, it's a good thing. And I would love to see both Ecuador and the US continue to make some noise in this
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
but
I agree. It's good
anyway,
stuff.
let's talk about something that's much simpler to understand and pull off, and that's shrinking the, US government.
It took me
Uh
about 10 years to figure out what offsides was in soccer, so I don't know that I'll figure this out much quicker.
Um, I sit here particularly because I'm away and I'm able to observe the interworkings, not so much in fighting that's going on. I've gotten bored with that, but I've started looking at the programs and the programs that are being pushed forward and the things that are going on in New York and all of this. And a as an old guy, uh, I look back on my life, and it just seems, Carl, like more and more of my individual freedoms have been taken away from me. My freedom to make myself, my freedoms to say what I wish, where I wish, when I wish, that sort of thing, are now being curtailed, in some cases absconded with by special interest groups, with our government supporting it. You and I have talked about it for heck, we've talked about it for years about the government waste, the programs that are wasting money, wasting time, not accomplishing anything. And I went back and pulled some stats. I'll tell you what really is driving me. You and I've talked about it. I think both of us have somewhat of a libertarian leaning, a little bit philosophy of government. I was at one time a member, card carrying member of the Libertarian Party. Began to realize that not only was I tilted because libertarians were not going to be elected beyond maybe some local elections, but the party, while I think it has some tremendous ideas and a general philosophy of governing, they hadn't figured out how to run their own party, uh, much less be a player in national elections. We have had a few outlier politicians that have elevated themselves as independents, but for the most part, the party, most people don't even understand what the Libertarian Party is all about, and certainly couldn't name a Libertarian candidate. Um,
I do
But
think the
I
Libertarian
think,
Party, and I think it's very misunderstood, but I think
yeah.
if you look at and closely with what this nation was founded on and the principles of that is it's not even an argument. It does align with you can agree whether you like what it was founded on or not, but it is the party that most closely aligns to that. And
Mhm.
it's
Well,
not even that
let me
close.
give you some numbers here, and then I want you to follow up on that because I think that's
Okay.
a very, very important discussion for us to understand precepts of Libertarian Party. I went back and just took a look at our government spending. I think we've gotten to a point as a nation that we just have determined that deficit spending is something that we're supposed to do. We're never supposed to balance a budget when we get one, et cetera. But this I found in overarching numbers. Last year, fiscal 2025, the Congressional Budget Office said that the United States government took in a total of $5.2 trillion in revenue from all the sources of revenue that come to the government. Our outlays were 7 trillion.
Seems
And
like a problem.
I don't think that surprises us at all. But what's interesting is of that 7 trillion, 4.2 trillion of that is mandatory. That's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment compensation, programs like SSI, food stamps, those social issues, and then interest on our debt continues to grow in terms of dollar volume. So you got 4.2, unless we make some significant means taking another hard look at Social Security, at Medicare, at Medicaid, that sort of thing. Those are pretty much we're stuck with. Then you get into the discretionary side, and it's 1.9 trillion. Now, 9 trillion of that, or the point, I'm sorry, 0.900 billion of that is defense.
Mm.
And the other 1 trillion is discretionary spending. And I thought, okay, what is spending without getting into all the individual little, and by the way, one thing I'm going to give a compliment to you might want to mark this down in the history books
I
because
will.
it's one of the, okay. And that is that between 2005 and 2024, our discretionary spending by our government has averaged 7.2% of our GDP. In 2025, it was only 6.2%
Hmm.
of GDP, which tells me some programs have been cut, some spending has been cut. And I don't think the average person out there has not felt it. So it tells me a little bit about, maybe there's some progress that can be made. I'm not sure. I know that Trump will take credit for that cut, so I might as well let him have it. But
I
but
think it was
somehow or
it
another,
was more Elon. It ultimately was him because he allowed Elon to do it. But Doge is, I mean, you go tie the numbers to a lot of that what they did. They're still doing things. I mean, you can go put tangible things to what they've shut down and done. So yeah, it
right,
is
right,
whether it's making it or not is a different discussion because so far out of whack. It's kind of like I don't know, rearranging chairs on the Titanic right now.
yeah. Well, if we look at that, if we look at outlay on the first of all, not defense spending, Department of Transportation, health benefits for veterans, you've got of education, you've got housing assistance programs, you got the Department of Health, you've got the DOJ, or at least the administrative side of the Justice Department, community and regional development, natural resources, protections, international affairs, space, science, and technology. And then there's a category called other, which is only 60. But anyway, you look at those and you say, well, while you may not be able to cut all of that non-defense spend, is there a way that some of this is bloated, some of it is waste, some of it is totally unnecessary, some of it maybe should be the responsibility of the individual states? There's a lot of directions we could take this, and we probably will. That's our our non-defense discretionary side. As far as on the defense side, it was 893 in 2025. And the majority of that, so you understand this, operations and maintenance, to that, military personnel, procurement, which you're familiar with, of course, RDT&E, research and development, testing and evaluation. Another other category, which is basically the Department of Energy's atomic energy responsibilities and that sort of thing. So the question, I think, for me becomes, if we could adopt at least some of what the Libertarian Party platform proposes of this spending, could we curtail? I will tell you this, that increasing taxation is not the answer, and it's never going to be the answer. It's the old adage of a gerbil will grow to the size of its cage. You
Well,
increase
eventually,
taxes, you're going to
you run
increase
out of other
spending.
people. Yeah, eventually you run out of other people's money too. That's the whole thing with this socialism push and these elections this week. New York and people, oh, Mamdani. And I was listening to Megyn Kelly this morning. I was one of them that said, oh, let Mamdani do what he's going to do and people will see. Well, not the case. And there is a common thread with a lot of these people. They're good looking and they're articulate. And they got
Right.
a message that, if you don't listen deeply to what they're saying, it sounds pretty attractive. But all of a sudden
Right.
across the country, the Democrats have got a real problem. Their party's been hijacked big time. It's being just, and it's not a secret. It's an outright, they're admitting they're socialist, and people that said this couldn't happen, there was a little push earlier this week that I think is waking up some people, especially the Democratic Party, looking at it saying, "Whoa, man, what are we going to do with this?" So
Right. Right. No,
that's
absolutely.
the bad news is that's not going to help anything we're talking about, because I think last time I checked, the socialist, whether you're democratic socialist or whatever, or communist, those their philosophies on spending probably are not very close to the libertarians. So I don't think that
No,
trend our cause a lot.
right. Well, you said, Carl, that I have, obviously a lot of friends who are conservatives or call themselves conservatives that are staunch Republicans. And I've always told them that, man, your party is way too liberal for me as a libertarian, at least in terms of social programs and
Yep.
funding and that sort of thing. But tell me, how far from the original ideas of our founding fathers have we gone off the rails, at least
Yeah.
as you see it?
So this is another week of self-education for Carl. So I like this process because I think I know a few things, and it's been a little while since I've taken history and had to do a test on it. And one thing that really got me down this pathway, so Cassie and Kaylee and Claire and I went to Washington, D.C. a year ago, last spring break for 2025. Very cool. Everybody should go see Washington, D.C. It's a neat place, but something couldn't resist. I finally was like, what in the hell is going on? Where our hotel was, and we walked there, we kept walking by this. You can't even call it a building. It's like of blocks of concrete. And what is this building? It's the Department of Agriculture. And so I went and did research. I'm like, this is just one department of building, and I'll get into kind of how many there are. So I went and looked it up. I did when we were there, but I looked it up again just to kind of just calibrate people on how bad this is. Again, this is one department, the Department of Agriculture. That wasn't, by the way, one of the original ones that the founders started. It's an add-on. So I went and looked up the Department of Agriculture, and currently they have there's a 350,000 square foot building. It's the Jamie L. Whitten building. It's the historic that's facing the mall. But then the USDA South building, which encompasses 2.1 to 2.2 million. And so they have a combined 2.5 million square feet. It has 4,500 rooms and 7 miles of corridors. Before
Wow.
the Pentagon was built, largest office building, it was the largest office building in the world before the Pentagon was built.
Wow.
So 2.5 million square feet. Currently, this is even better, and I bet they didn't cut their budget by this much. Currently, it's 80 to 85% vacant. And so they got
Wow.
this huge building right in a prime area, $1.6 billion deferred maintenance backlog. So they're not even keeping up with the buildings. So they're falling apart. They're trying to figure out how to do away with them, tear them down or something. But again, just to kind of calibrate what we're talking about. So when I go and start with where we were, how we started and kind of where we are, that's simply one of these many departments and agencies that has that much building space, 2.5 million square feet with a $1.6 billion maintenance backlog. So anyway, just to start out with a little bit of color. And then, yeah, I did go back. How was it intended? Almost 250 years ago when we were setting all this up, how was it set? And I think it's important, we've talked about this too, is to frame what is the United States for people that don't want to or don't want to go back and listen to some of our previous podcasts. It's a federation of states. And the intent was not for the government to be what it is. It was never to be this powerful, never to be this bureaucratic. It was never to have all these departments and agencies. That was not the original intent. It was the creation of the federal government was limited and enumerated powers. And I think that's important. It was only supposed to exercise power specifically granted in the Constitution. Everything else was for the states. So,
Right.
and again, what's in the Constitution is very limited. And the 10th Amendment, which we talked about on a previous episode, it pretty clearly lays out what was expected to do: provide national defense, conduct foreign affairs, regulate interstate and international commerce, coin money, establish posts, maintain federal courts, and protect individual liberties. That was it.
Right.
And in
And
federal,
coining money is just about the purpose of that is just about to disappear
right?
when you think about it.
Yeah.
The post office, for all intents and purposes, by the way, we haven't had a post office in Ecuador since 2000.
Yeah. If it weren't for Amazon, the postal
Everybody's
service would be
surviving.
bankrupt.
So no, I'm
And
glad you enumerated that because obviously we've grown a little beyond that, haven't we?
yeah, let me tell just a quick on kind of where we are and how we got there. So think it's also interesting that in Federalist 45, James Madison said, powers delegated by the proposed constitution of the federal government are few and defined. So that was the original intent, and now here we are. And for executive departments, the first Congress created three: the United States Department of State, the United States Department of the Treasury, and the Department of War. Now DOW, that they're the Department of Defense, but the new naming is Department of War. And then Congress also created the Attorney General, which eventually became the DOJ. For roughly the first 60 years, these few departments were doing everything. So we made it 60 years with that for three departments, and then the Attorney General created the Department of Justice. So you basically, for the first 60 years, had four. And then when you look at it, they wanted it to be small. So, okay, let's fast forward. How do we get to where we are, and how do we get so many agencies? There were some driving factors that you see. Industrialization in the late 1800s, as the country started industrializing, Congress created departments to deal with agriculture, commerce, labor, and Western expansion. So out of that, in the late 1800s, we ended up with the Department of Labor, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, and the Department of Labor. So there's four more size, and that's not been that long. And then the Progressive era and the New Deal. So Roosevelt and Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt really expanded a lot, and so a lot of regulation, administration. So you banking, securities, labor relations, more agriculture, and then the social welfare. And another one, the Great Depression. So that was another expansion. And then really got into World War II. And then you end up with agencies. So the CIA, NSA, DIA, FBI, all those were World War II, Cold War era. And then the Great Society, modern regulatory state, 60s and 70s, you got the
60s and
EPA,
70s.
OSHA, Department of Education, and then 9/11, Homeland Security. So slow creep toward where we are now, 250 years later, from four to what's really funny. The Department of Homeland Security consolidated 22 agencies into a department. So that tells you something. And so then I said, okay, how many departments and agencies do we have now? Thought that should be a pretty easy thing. Turns out it's not even documented. So currently there are 15 cabinet departments: state, treasury, defense, justice, interior, agriculture, commerce, labor, health and human services, housing and urban development, transportation, energy. And then that there's hundreds of agencies, commissions, boards, and sub-agencies. So there is exact number is very unclear, depending on how you estimates range from 100 agencies to well over 400 federal agencies and sub-agencies. So the Federal
Wow.
Registry currently has more than 400 entities with rulemaking authority or publishing authority. Um, so again, crazy, and that's where you get it. And it's like, how do you once you get the toothpaste is that far out of the bottle? How in the world can you ever put it back? So I do think there's a way. So I want to turn it back over to you and let you talk about a little bit of the libertarian stuff. But I've got kind of some thoughts on what I think the core are that you probably would need to have, and then even some ways to enact part of what you're going to say. I think there are ways to do it for sure.
Okay. Well, let me start first of all with just kind of the overarching preamble, as it were, to the Libertarian Party stance, because trust opposite end of the spectrum from where we are now.
Yeah.
Because the idea is to keep the government to a bare minimum, and you've already articulated what the original intent of our founding fathers was. Most libertarians will tell you that the government should be involved only from a federal standpoint. From a federal standpoint, is what we're talking about here. That they should only be involved in national defense. They should be involved in interstate commerce because we are a federation of states. We are not a confederacy, or we're not independent nations. So there is a reason for that. And then a system of justice, of courts, to protect the Constitution. Nothing else but the Constitution. And then everything else beyond that, if it exists at all in government, should be at the state level. And
Mhm.
we're not going to go down that path right now. We may further down the road. But so what they say is that the Libertarian Party challenges the cult, as they call it, omnipotent state, and they defend the rights of the individual. They hold that individuals have the right to exercise sole dominion of their own lives, and they have the right to live in any manner that they choose, so they don't forcibly interfere with the equal rights of others to live in whatever manner they choose. So that's kind of the overarching philosophy. Live and let live. Don't hurt anyone else. Don't force your ideas on anyone else. Let them. Um, they
I think
believe
one
that.
point on that real quick,
Go ahead.
I think is really, man, I think it's so important, and it really is inalienable rights. That's kind of the foundation of the whole piece of it is liberty. And I think what's really intriguing to me, and I've heard a lot of people talk about kind of my foundational thing, is that's how I feel about things. I don't care how you live your life, don't mess with me. But what's really interesting now is this progressive party, whatever, crazy far left wing of the Democratic Party, and now the Socialist Party, is it used to the liberals who were standing up for people's rights and those organizations, and now is in trying to protect this group. And when you start dividing and protecting groups and you start elevating their rights, well, by nature of doing that, you then are infringing on other people's rights. And
Right.
so,
Correct.
this guise of we're trying to help the underprivileged, underserved, whatever. It really is best illuminated with the gay wedding cake baking thing. And, that caught a lot of national attention. But at the end of the day, I have no problem with gay people getting. I have no
Right.
problem with a business who says they don't want to make a cake for it.
Right.
Capitalism will work that out. But when you try to tell that cake baking place, that bakery, that they've got to make a cake, you just infringed on their rights. And I think that's a
Right.
foundational piece that we've lost a lot of. I have no problem with everybody having their rights. I think that's great. It just should not come at the expense of someone else losing theirs. So I
Right.
just think that's a
And that's a good
foundational
point.
piece.
And that's a part of this preamble of the Libertarian Party. and I'll mention in just a second. Basically, the libertarian philosophy of government is that the government, when they exist, cannot violate the rights of the individual. And they articulate three. The first is the right to life. They prohibit the prohibition of initiating physical force against others. So, in other words, play nice. You can't hurt one another.
Yeah.
Okay. The government needs to enforce that. The right to liberty of speech. So, their belief is that any attempt by the government to abridge the freedom of government censorship in any form under any circumstances cannot cannot take place because it abridges. And then the last one, and this is a big part of the platform of the Libertarian Party, is the right to property. They oppose any uh, government interference with private property, such as confiscation, nationalization, eminent domain. Uh, they support the prohibition of robbery, trespass, fraud, and misrepresentation, because those are ways in which people steal things from others. And they also state that people, and goes back to what you were just saying, they oppose any interference by the government in the areas of voluntary contractual relations among individuals. People should not be forced to sacrifice their lives and their property for the benefit of others. They should be left free from the government to deal with one another as free traders, which ultimately they say will develop an economic system of the free market. And that should be what guides all transactions, all contractual agreements. They stress buyer beware. It's not the government's responsibility to have someone looking over the shoulders of anyone entering into a contractual relationship with one another and trying to protect one from the other. So, one of the things that it does require, and this is, I think, maybe where um, we've gotten so far away from the idea of personal accountability for our lives and for the things that we have to deal with. See, I'm old enough to remember when there was no such thing as Medicare. There was no say. Old people like my parents figured out a way to take care of their medical needs and that sort of thing. But we have so much of this now that is ingrained that basically, I think to a large extent, you don't have to worry about being held accountable because the government is here to take care of you when you fail to do something, choose not to do what is in your best interest, etc. And that flies in the libertarianism. So I thought what we might do, because I think even who, like my, at one time was a member of this party, to go back and take a look at uh, the platform itself and the points that the Libertarian Party um, has suggested as a means to a leaner and much more efficient uh, government that also aligns more closely with what our founding fathers. Some of it uh, people will immediately dismiss as ridiculous. I'm not saying it should be, but because it flies in the face of what we've been accustomed to for 100 years or 50 years anyway. But I think it is worth looking at. Some of it, I think we can also look at. And what I'd like to kind of take these one at a time and say, and just between the two of us, say that makes sense to me or that doesn't make sense. And then just a comment on, is there any way we can get back to that? Do we see bits and pieces of that already? And is it worth pursuing? Because some of the points that they make, some of their beliefs, you may dismiss out of hand and say, no, that's not good. That is not good for our country, and the government needs to intervene. So,
Well, I think
if
one
we
thing
start,
too, but I think the earlier, and I didn't even look at it necessarily from a libertarian piece, just kind of necessary because the world's changed. So to simplify things and say we can just go back the way it was 250 years ago and have four, departments and things are going to be great. I think that's a little short sighted. But I don't think it's 400 and something. And I think close what I was looking at to what you were saying. Again, it's national defense. The other one I think that's foreign policy in general,
right.
because there is an entity here. We're not a bunch of collection of countries like Europe is. It is interesting. I was telling Bob today that we were doing this, that the EU, Europe, can exist because their countries are basically our states. They all speak different languages. yet they all live on the same landmass, get along. We mostly speak the same languages here. Get to Louisiana and some other parts, you can't may not know that. Um, but I think it's interesting because the EU basically tried to do, not necessarily successfully, what the United States has done with creating this conglomerate of things.
Right.
Um, but
Right.
they really don't need it. And I think
Right.
that's kind of what has become evident. But anyway, national defense, foreign policy, border security, you could possibly leave that up to states, but
You could probably throw that under national defense, but
that
you're right.
one,
That's a part.
that's a piece of it. The courts, the Department of Justice, I think there is some good. The Treasury and currency, the interstate commerce, and then the piece I think that has to be, or it should be part of the Supreme Court and the justice system is, I think the overarching thing they should be responsible for, and I think this is a big piece of the libertarian, their whole foundation is protection of the constitutional rights. I don't
Right.
think if you look
Right.
at most people right now and ask them, what are the things the federal government's supposed to do? I don't think anybody would list that. They don't see that as, and part of the problem is they would have to protect, the people from themselves. Um, but, and then a minimalist cabinet, instead of 15 cabinet positions, Department of State, Treasury, Defense, and Justice. That gets back to kind of where it was. I think Homeland Security is debatable. I don't know that they do anything or not, but we could talk about that one. But again, I think there are some basic ones that make a lot of sense, and it's through a different lens than it was 250 years ago looking at the world. But I definitely think the Libertarian Party is in line with what the foundational need is. So anyway,
Right.
yeah, let's
Well,
scroll through.
it's interesting because they own three what you would call planks to their
Right.
platform, and then there's some sub arguments or pieces to each of those planks. The first one is personal liberty, which they think overrides. Now, what they
Mhm.
say is that individuals are inherently free to make choices for themselves, and they must accept the responsibility for the consequences of the choices that they make. Now, I think you and I would agree with that.
Yep.
But we have a society out there that is telling people that they are not responsible for the choices they make. Society imposed this upon you or your upbringing or whatever. They
Yeah,
support an individual.
personal accountability is a real problem, and I think I don't think it's hard to figure out which one's the chicken and which one's the egg, but personal accountability is an issue. But I think that comes from some indoctrination of constantly telling people that they're a victim. You're a
Right,
victim of fill in the blank, whatever, whether
right,
it was bad parents or socioeconomic, whatever the case is. And I think there's a reason for that. The reason is if everybody's a victim and there's no personal accountability, then you need some overarching power to come in and help you because you're probably too dumb to do things on your own. And I
right,
really think foundationally, that's a lot of the problem with government
right,
seeking more power. The progressive left, they want to take all your money and decide what you get back. So whatever you make, they're going to take it all and decide what house you're going to get to live in and where you can travel and how you're going to get there. And in saying it, although they do say the quiet part out loud sometimes, they basically are saying you're too stupid to run your own life. So we're going to take all of your money and do it for you.
right.
That's kind of what's
Bear
going.
in mind that is that when they call you or I stupid, too stupid to make those decisions, that is simply a matter of perspective from
Yes.
their own inherent beliefs and desires for power and whatever.
It's because they're
And it
they're in the spot where they believe they're smarter than we are.
and you have a right to be stupid.
Yeah.
Sorry,
It's
but you
fun to watch
do. So
sometimes.
see that the Libertarian Party as a part of this platform says now this doesn't mean we necessarily agree or disagree with the decisions that people make.
That's right.
Okay. And I think this is very important and it is ignored too much in today's political climate. No individual, group, or government may initiate force against another individual, group, or government. Libertarians reject the idea that groups have inherent rights. Ooh, that will get some people a little upset.
Well, I
We
think what's
support the
funny with that,
rights.
Mark
What's that?
Levin, way back when I used to listen to him before he kind of went crazy and got more annoying, he asked the question one night, and I think I brought this up on a previous episode, what's more important, equality or liberty? And people called in for a lot and they talked through it. But I think, and I think, we're sitting here in June in Pride Month, listen to Tim Dillon on Rogan. He went on a whole rant about he doesn't understand why, and he's a gay guy, hilarious comedian. He said, I don't understand why the San Diego Padres have to become gay, or my bank has to become gay in June, or like Northrop Grumman's got to become gay. He said, and honestly, it's doing more harm for everything because it's making people annoyed because you're shoving something down people's throats that they really don't care about, frankly. Dana White was asked recently why the UFC doesn't do more in Pride Month. He said, because I don't care. He said, I know
Right.
we have female fighters who are gay. We've got shirts they wear that say we love all fighters, the rainbow thing. He said, I'm sure we have gay male fighters, but I don't care. We're in the fight business.
Right.
That
Right.
inherently, they all have rights. And I think what's
Well,
funny, if
you're
we
right.
really honored and we did what the libertarians are saying,
Right.
you wouldn't have to worry about gay marriage. It all just happens. Nobody
Right.
cares. Gay people can get married. Whatever you want to do happens. Again, as long as you're not imposing that on me or any of your beliefs on me, the live and let live thing works. And it doesn't matter if I
Well,
agree with it or don't agree with it, but as infringing on your neighbors or anybody else's liberties, say la vie.
right. Well, you know, it's interesting. With myself being a cancer survivor, I still question why uh, sports teams, and it seems like it's 4 or 5 times a year, have to dress in pink. And those who do not are typically vilified in the press and by certain groups out there for not supporting breast cancer awareness.
Well, you know what Tim Dillon said about
Whether
it?
whether you like that support or not, and it's up to the individual team, up to the individual players, that sort of thing. And yet we have decided that you must be in favor of breast cancer if you're not going to wear pink Adidas on the
Well,
court.
it's the exact same thing Tim Dillon said about all the stuff with Pride Month and all that. It's this scenario. It's a bunch of people virtue signaling that I'm on the right
Right,
side of this and I'm a good person because I support this thing. It's all the same
right,
thing. It's just
yeah,
different flavors of virtue signaling to say I'm a good person. See, I've got a flag in my yard, or I wear pink in October, whatever that is. It's the whole, and we can argue whether some of them are better than others. But again,
right,
let people have the liberty to do what the heck they want to. And the good news is if the NFL wants to do that, or the Padres want to have, pride flag hats. But then the problem is you've got guys who are writing Bible verses on them that they're going to get
hmm
fined. I guess that's finally
right,
gotten worked out. But it's all that you wouldn't have to worry about any of it. And part of it is you're in an organization. So if you work for the NFL or you work for MLB or you work for whoever, and they want to do it, then you got to have a conversation about, do you want to be part of that organization or not?
right.
And if if
That's
if
right,
they if they don't want to do it and you do, then you're not going to be able to wear that hat if you want to. That's part of being part of an organization. But
right,
outside of the organization, as an independent, individual walking around, you can do whatever the heck you want to. But part
right.
of signing up to work for an organization is you do have to
You
operate
have to
within the
abide by the
confines
rules.
of their rules, and that's just how. Or you
Brendan
cannot if you
Soares,
don't support
Brendan
all that stuff.
we learned that. Brendan
Turns
Sorsby learned
out
that this week, didn't he?
he
But we
absolutely
won't
did.
path.
No, but I
We've
mean,
already beat that horse.
at the end of the day, you have to abide by an organization's rules if you're an employee of that organization or part of it. But if you're not,
Right,
doesn't matter. But a lot of
right.
this is virtue signaling from people just trying to say, I'm a good person. See, I support this, whatever. It's
Well, let's take a look at some of the individual uh, points under this first, and just tell me what your feelings are.
yeah.
Fools own their own bodies, and they have their rights over them that other individuals, groups, and governments may violate. Individuals have the freedom and the responsibility to decide what they knowingly and voluntarily wish to consume, what risks they accept to their own health, finances, safety, or life. Hardcore libertarians will tell you right up front, um, if you don't want to wear a helmet when you ride your motorcycle, that is your business. There should be no laws. Now, I've heard people say, well, all that does is raise the insurance rates for all motorcycle riders. No, that's very easily can be written in. Just like an insurance company may not cover inebriated when you're on your motorcycle, they can write into the policy that if you do not have your helmet on,
Yep.
that the medical side of the policy is canceled. I mean, that's simply a contractual deal. So don't tell me that
Or
it's
you pay higher
necessary.
insurance premiums if you skydive or
Right.
you race cars or ride motorcycles. I mean, all that stuff is easily not spread among the people partake. So
So
that's
what do you think? Do you think people should have the freedom to consume whatever they wish? They actually deal with this specifically as it relates to drugs later on.
yeah,
But they're saying if I make it, if it's my decision to put my not endangering anyone else, it's my right, and the government has no right to interfere.
yeah, I'm a big fan of that one. I 6 more episodes. I fully 100% support everything about that. Again, it's no different. I'm if you don't want to wear a seatbelt, don't wear a seatbelt. You know, if you want to ride a unicycle that's got a 500 horsepower motor on it with no helmet down the interstate, freaking do it. I don't care. Again, unless you're
Right.
doing something where you're going to endanger the people around you, then we got to talk about it. But as long as if you want to go jump off the top, fly with no parachute, try it. See how it works out. Don't care. I think the one thing where this gets used and it gets a little dicey, you know, the my body, my choice thing. I think that was an interesting one when you compare and contrasted the same people who were on one side of that argument when it came to vaccines and abortion. So
Right.
when it was vaccines, it's not your body and not your choice. You got to take the freaking vaccine because everybody said so. But with abortion, it's your body and your choice. It's like,
Right.
uh, you're on two different sides of the same argument. That doesn't make sense to me. In
You sound like
my
me, Carl.
yeah,
You hate
it's
inconsistency,
I
right?
do.
At least be
I can
consistent
respect
in
people
your
who have a difference of opinions, but
Mhm.
when you're on the side of the argument that was determined when you woke up and went, "Okay, the political winds are blowing that way. I'm gonna be on this side," I have no respect for you. You're a hypocrite, and
Right.
my least favorite, group of people are hypocrites. But I think the interesting piece is I think that can even survive, take the abortion piece, and again, not to dive down that rabbit hole, but I think that can survive the same thing. I think where that really gets into, and I think there's a lot more data and evidence that shows how quickly babies can survive and how young they can be. Early term babies living on their own very soon. That's where my whole argument with that's been, and it's not a pro-abortion against abortion thing. The individual liberties applies to all people. And to me, if you're going to charge somebody with double murder if they kill a mother and a baby that's unborn, that
Right.
person also in the justice system has a life that also has the liberty and has the ability to choose if they get to stay alive or not. Again,
Thanks for
this
pointing
is
that out, that
this is not a
inconsistency in the law.
pro-abortion or against abortion. It's if we're going to truly honor liberties of every individual, it comes down to the hard part then is defining and then that gets into some religious beliefs and everything else. And but when does life start? Is it conception or is it in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, when that is? But I think most people, no matter what side they're on, start getting into late termism and all. It's like that kid's vibe. So
Right.
again, I think the libertarian piece, because a lot of people, what about abortion? If it's my body, no, it still holds because it's a human, and that human also
Right.
has their individual liberties, which gets back to what we
Right.
said. If my liberties infringe on yours, it's kind of the ultimate one of that is then it's a real problem. But I think that can
Right.
survive too. You got to define when life begins, and that's not necessarily easy with all the different opinions on that. But anyway, just but other than that one little asterisk to clarify,
Yeah. Uh, Under the area of expression and communication, they say we support the full freedom of expression and we oppose government censorship, regulation, or control of communications media or technology. And they make the statement language that is perceived to be offensive to certain groups or individuals is not a cause for legal action. Speech that is not literally a threat of aggression or violence, not in itself aggression or violence, and can never be used to justify aggression or violence. In other words, if I say something bad about your particular, does not justify your response being violent, aggressive toward me. It says that individuals are responsible for their own reactions to speech. I think a very good point. We favor the freedom to engage in or to abstain from any religious activities, that do not violate the rights of others. We oppose government actions that either aid or attack religion. Anything in there you got a problem with?
I think
I know
that one, and I like to prove the points of it, but I'm
sure,
100%
yeah,
behind when, people are like, what about cults? Cool. If you want to join a cult, I'm all in. I have no problem with
yeah.
it. Again, if you're starting to harm children and do other things, that's a different discussion, but let's make great documentaries eventually when they all play out. So I have no problem with cults. It's, do it. Again, that freedom, you're an individual. And if you fall into the trance of a cult, then that's your own fault. And it shouldn't
Right,
be the government's responsibility to try to keep you out of it. I'm a I'm a really, 100% no exception freedom of speech person. I've had a lot of
right,
debates and arguments with people, and I think the thing that Elon did with X, if we survive as a nation, is going to prove to be one of the most important things because the problem with it's hate speech or that's misinformation or disinformation or all these categories we've created. Who the hell's the
right,
everybody has
right,
a personal bias. And so if
right,
there is no pure person who can be the arbiter of free speech.
right,
And AI can't do it because it's programmed by a person. So anytime you start calling out hate speech, misinformation, whatever, all these different freaking categories we've created, that things were getting labeled on social media and you got banned from all these different things. It's silliness. And the worst part is, in hindsight, now that we're, 5 years beyond a lot of that silliness, most of the things that were being said were freaking true. I mean, all the doctors that Joe Rogan had on and things were going on, it's now proven out that it was actually 100% true. And there were ulterior motives for money and trying to do all these things. Well, that's where not having full free speech gets you in a real problem. And that's been a
right,
big discussion on X because they've been the trend. Now you've got YouTube and Facebook and all the other ones, and Zuckerberg's done away with, censorship for the most part. There's still some, but X is
mhm,
the Wild West. But I
right,
think they've done a really good job because the best way, and Rogan says this a lot, to handle some crazy person that's got something outlandish. Example, when he starts saying insane things on X and other places, what happens? Well, Adidas fires him and other things happen, which is funny because Adidas was formed by a bunch of Nazis and now they don't like Kanye. But anyway, um, the court of public opinion will take care of itself. And I think the way they've done
right,
community notes for people to immediately go say this isn't true and here's why, let it play itself out in the court of public
right.
opinion. But there are no true arbiters of free speech. It's either all or
No,
none. And if you start trying to limit it because of a category that's offensive or hurtful or whatever, it doesn't work. If people say ridiculous, outlandish things that are hurtful to people or groups of people, they'll be dealt with. It'll work out.
right. It'll work itself out. You're
Yep.
right. Let me ask you about this one now. This is interesting because of your personal background, your family background in the intelligence arena and that sort of thing. Their concept of privacy. They advocate individual privacy and government transparency. They're committed to ending the government's practice of spying on everyone. We support the rights recognized by the Fourth Amendment to be secure in our persons, home, property, and communications. They say that protection from unreasonable search and seizure should include records held by third parties, such as email, medical, and library records. Strong statement or stance from the perspective of any information about yourself should be held and owned only by yourself and not shared with the government for whatever purposes they may determine they need to know. Now, if you do, especially if you protect texts and emails, which these days would be very hard to do, uh, that could change of court prosecutions and that sort of thing. Is that are they going too far? Well, a personal communication that not the government's business, including the DOJ or the FBI or anyone like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
Where
that
do you stand
one.
on that one?
Yeah, again, I fully agree with that one. I think the problem is of everything we're going to talk about, and when we get to kind of unwinding some of these things, I think it's sailed so far. If everything were, I think we could get back to 5 departments before we could fix that problem.
Rob,
And,
yeah,
and technology has really exacerbated the problem. When we talk about 9/11 and the Department of Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, and my problem with that, all of those kind of things and organizations and laws is when you look at them, Huntsville, with all the camera organization, the federal funding, we've got one of the best drone programs in Huntsville for the police department and the local municipality, short of Miami-Dade County. And so when I look at that, Sheriff Kevin Turner is a good friend of mine, love him to death. Got plenty of friends with Huntsville Police Department, and I don't believe those guys are using it for any ill purposes. But
Okay.
what if one day when Kevin retires or the Huntsville Police Department changes or Tommy Battle's not and you've got all that, boy, you've laid the groundwork because there's no privacy in Huntsville. Every street
Yeah,
light or every stoplight.
think of all the CCTVs that are
That's what I'm saying.
everywhere.
Huntsville
Yeah.
has more. And I've told people recently, like when you drive around Huntsville, look up every intersection, every street you're walking down. You will not, and it is getting to be this way pretty much anywhere. It's very hard in a city right now. If you think you're going to commit a crime, just look at some of these things that have happened. They can piece it together so dang. I mean, look at that dude that shot the CEO of United Healthcare. They pieced all that together. I mean, all this stuff in a city. And so when you look at it, like, that seems good. You help fight crime.
Mhm.
All this stuff, and there's several acronyms that they're escaping me right now, but there's one with tag recognition. There's a gunshot recognition system that's in a number of places. It wasn't active in Austin during one of their last shootings, but they can hear gunshots anywhere and they can pinpoint them to a pretty good location and quickly can go respond. So again, when you look at those in the hands of trustworthy law enforcement and all that, that seems like a really good thing. The problem is the lens I always like to look at it is if you do have a tyrannical local, state, federal government that comes in, use those tools. And I
Right.
think, and the problem is anybody who thinks they're using Signal or WhatsApp or you name it, iMessages, whatever, and you think it's freaking secure,
Yeah.
it's not. Tucker Carlson did a really good job outlining that when he was talking about interviewing Putin. He was using Signal and all those encrypted apps. And lo and behold, he gets reached out to about discussions he's having on all those super secret encrypted apps. None of
Yeah.
it is. The
Yeah.
NSA, the CIA have proved that. The FBI with some of these crimes that have happened with Apple had the big debate with them where they weren't going to give, we're not going to give the FBI what they need. It's encrypted. Nobody can do until they did because they've got
Yeah,
more
well,
money,
that's the
smart people.
Germans thought that they had thing that was, in World War II that
Yep.
was encrypted and couldn't be broken
So I
until
think
it was.
anybody right now with all we use, if you really want to try to be a criminal or even a person who's honest who wants to be off the grid, you better not have a cell phone. You better not have a TV in your house. I mean, you can't have any electronic devices. You got to drive a car that was built before 1999, probably, or else you're fooling yourself because it just is. And so to
Well,
unwind
I
that,
think
unfortunately, I think it's hard.
I think it has hung its hat on, and it you can overlook it if you read through it too quickly. They're talking about protection from unreasonable search and seizure.
Yeah, the
So
problem is I think they're using
they're
this.
putting it on the judiciary to make those decisions as to whether or not and its retrieval was
Right.
reasonable in this particular circumstance for this particular case.
And I think if you look
Uh,
at it in the pure sense, so many times it's not reasonable the way they piece things together and what they do. And the problem is even some of that leads to false convictions because you can
right.
start piecing
No,
some things
absolutely.
together situationally and circumstantially that legitimate. All the geolocation they're doing with cell phones now. Again, when you look at that Brian Koberger that killed those kids in Idaho, that seemed like a good thing. But could there
Mhm.
have been a lot of the geolocation, all that stuff that happened, and some circumstantial stuff where he was just hanging out in the area? Maybe. I mean, again, there's a lot of things. The line of where that should start and stop is so hard to figure out. I think again,
Right.
I fully
No, it is.
support individual privacy and all that. Also, if you don't, here's the problem: is some people say, well, if you're not a criminal, you shouldn't worry about it. I don't think that's the intent. That's not what it is. There shouldn't be spying on U.S. citizens, and unfortunately, with Snowden and some of these people who came out, it's not good how they did what they did. But boy, it exposed a lot of what's going on with U.S. citizens, and even the
Right.
way they do some things and shenanigans with the whole Russian craziness with the dossier, the Steele dossier, and all that. Some of it got exposed. If you can go surveillance acts If you know a person like Tucker Carlson is talking to somebody in Russia, then you can go get a warrant to say you need to figure out what's going on with this Russian thing, and then you back into having that country help you spy on the U.S. citizens.
Right.
So that one I
Right.
fully support. I think, unfortunately, I think that's pretty hard to unwind. I think it's a real
Oh,
problem for where we're headed.
here's a couple, or at least one that I think we probably can come to an agreement with. Maybe I think we will pretty quickly, and it's personal relationships. It has to do with orientation, preference, gender, or gender identity should have no impact on the government's individuals, such as current marriages, child custody, adoption, immigration, or service laws. Since the government does not have the authority to define, promote, license, or restrict personal relationships, regardless of the number of participants.
Yeah.
The libertarian point of view is if you want to have a polygamous family relationship, that is your business, nobody else's. Consenting adults should be free to choose their own sexual practices and personal relationships.
Yeah.
And then I love the way they conclude this because they like to take pokes at the government. It says, until such time as the government stops its illegitimate practice of marriage licensing, such licenses must be granted to all consenting adults who apply.
That's funny.
And the reality is the marriage license doesn't mean much anymore. Many states, you don't have to be a minister. You don't have to be ordained. You just have to be somebody who signs it. Some states don't require a marriage license.
Yeah.
So, but they love to poke fun at folks there.
I think
I don't have any problems with any of that.
I agree with all of it with one small caveat, and this is something
Okay.
I had not thought about until recently. And again, if we just honored all this, all the trans stuff, all the gay marriage, all that stuff gets fixed. Who cares? Do whatever you want to do. I do think, and it goes back similar to what we were talking about earlier, being part of an organization. If you are going to join the military, gay people, not worried about that. Join the military, don't care. Trans people, that creates a real issue because if you have any medication that you're on, you can't be in the military because if you got to go in a war, you can't even be assured you're going to have the medicine that you need to be on. So you get turned down for asthma and other common things because you become a burden to whatever unit you're part of. And so if you are on hormones and different things, other side of it, and you're not, fine. But I think the same rules apply to other problems where you've got medication that you're on regularly. You got to look at the same thing for that. That was
Well, and
brought up
I agree
recently.
with you. And so do it for the standpoint of the needed medications that you can't provide in the
That's right.
field or
That's what I'm
whatever.
saying. It doesn't matter if
And
you're
let's not
trans or whatever.
couch that as being transphobic
No,
because
it's
it's
just
not.
really it's a medication issue. And when I heard that, the practicality of it, I thought, boy, that's and I really didn't even understand some of the thing around asthmatics. That has nothing to do with whether they can perform or not perform. It comes down to if you're in battle and they don't have their inhaler, all of a sudden you've got a liability of a person you got to look after and you're putting everybody in danger. What's the same thing, whether it's diabetes, all those things cause an issue to into any medication that you've got to have and things, or that's altering your mind, which that's when you're changing your hormone balance, you're altering behavior and everything. Yeah, I don't care if it's trans or if you're on steroids because you want to be a Navy SEAL and you want to be bigger. All those things are an issue. So that
Right.
again, to me, it's
How
not
about
a liberties thing. You're going to be part of an organization. It's a highly functioning team, and you can't be a liability to somebody else because you're
right?
on some drugs.
How about their stance on parental rights? And I can agree with this. I do agree with this to a point, but you have to start defining something. Let's say that parents or other guardians have the right to raise their children according to their own standards and beliefs, provided that the rights of the children to be free from abuse and neglect are also protected. And I think, the abuse and neglect is obvious. If parents are doing something in the raising of their children that abuses them or that neglects them. The only thing that I have a real issue with, and maybe I shouldn't, is what if a parent decides that they don't want their children going to school?
That's what I was just
Not
about to
not be
say.
homeschooled. They just don't want
Right.
them going to school. They don't think education is
I
necessary.
think you could
I
couch
can
that
see
under neglect though, because you're
that,
you're
and that's the area. I think
you're
that now we're talking
impairing
about some areas that need to be
yeah,
defined.
you're impairing their
Maybe
ability to intellectually mature. So
Right,
I
right.
agree. You would have to define what is neglect. Neglect would have to encompass some things because there's no test on whether or not you can be a
And
parent. You just get to
it
be
can't
one.
be
So
too loosely defined,
no,
but I just believe that every child has the right to an education.
yes,
I have no problem with homeschooling.
right.
Now that brings us into, okay, how do you know if the homeschooling is effective? How do you know if they're really teaching them? Are you going to have tests? Now we're bringing in a government agency and somebody outside deciding what is passing and what is failing.
But I think that
So
would
you
fall even
begin to
within the
open up a
state's
can of
rights.
worms.
But I think that would be
But
fine with the state's rights stuff because the state
mhm,
education could set standards for education and what the standards are to be met, and whether you do that at home or you do that at a public school. Again, that to me
right.
could be a state's rights issue. But I think the neglect
Yeah.
piece has got to be well defined because that even gets into there's Scientology and some other things where if you get sick, you're just going to sit at home and pray. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm a big fan of praying, obviously. I think that's very helpful, and I think God can perform miracles. I think God has also given us smart people called doc and so I think
Right.
that neglect really defined because if you've got a religious belief that we don't believe in medicine, we just sit at home and pray and people get better, that's not good. I think so there again, that neglect piece would have to be well defined, but that
Right.
that said, yeah, I think we've eroded a lot of what parental rights are, and part
Yeah.
of it is it's not even given the kids rights. It's more about the government becoming the parent is
Right.
the problem.
Right. Right. Adult rights and responsibilities. This is interesting. It's very, very specific. It says individuals that are presumed to have adequate judgment to vote and to serve jury or in the military should also be presumed to have judgment to decide their own use and purchase of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, cannabis where it's permitted, and engage in other activities that are currently restricted by the government due to age. So what they're basically saying is if you can sign up to serve in the military at 18, you'll be able to buy liquor and beer at 18. You should be able to buy cigarettes at 18. This 18-21 variance is basically what they're saying needs to be eliminated.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
I don't
it's
have a
interesting
problem with that
how
at
I
all.
think it's funny how 18 became the number. If you really want
Yeah.
to look at a legit number that you should be an adult, it's probably 25. I mean, there's a lot of studies that show your brain's not developed until you're 25, which to get soldiers, maybe it's better to have people that are 18 because they don't know better. Um,
Right. Right.
but your brain's not fully developed till 25. So whether it's 18 or 21, drinking and some of these other things, I don't know that 18 or 21 matters. But I've said that for a long time. If we're going to, we're going to give them the ability to go fight in a dang war and ultimately sacrifice their life for this country, they should probably be able to have a beer and own
Right.
firearms and carry firearms. I mean, you're either in a because that's not a decision of your parents at that point. You're making an individual decision to go sign up and join the military and fight for your country and being willing to die for it.
Right.
If we're going to say people have enough autonomy at 18 to do that, I don't know what else they shouldn't have the ability to do.
Right. Now, this next one is interesting. They go into quite a bit of detail about this of crime and justice, and the government force needs to be limited to a protection of individuals' rights, life, liberty, and property. Okay. They should never be, government should never be permitted to violate those rights. And laws that should be limited in their application to violations of the rights of others, force or fraud or deliberate actions that put others at significant risk of harm. Since they support the repeal of all laws creating crimes without victims. You might not agree with the definition here, but such as gambling, the use of drugs for medicinal purposes, consensual transactions involving sexual services. So what they're basically in their mind are victimless crimes, except to you could get gonorrhea from sexual practices. Okay, going to a prostitute, but they say that's on you.
Yeah,
You took that on just like you decided not to wear a helmet when you rode your motorcycle
that's right.
to the brothel. So that's basically, where they're standing. Now, I've heard people try to expand this and say, well, but if you're allowed to participate in drugs and you become, or you gamble and you become addicted, that has an impact on your family, therefore others are being harmed. That is a very, very slippery slope. I
Yeah.
could make the case that some father who is focused only much money and garnering as much power as he possibly can is harming his family
Yeah.
as well. So I no problems with this one.
One thing that's and you brought up firearms and drugs a minute ago, and I've had a lot of debates with people because so many of these states have gone constitutional carry around concealed carry permits, and this is something I've spent a lot of time on and had tons of training for our church security team, um, and talked to our sheriff about it. Is I'm not a fan of this constitutional carry thing, and I had a debate with a liberal friend of mine years ago. Um, and I this is probably the one place where I differ a lot from libertarians and what they think about firearms. I believe absolutely everybody, and we can 18, whatever the number is, don't care, should be able to go purchase a firearm. You know, we can talk about whether you've had a felony or not. That I'm not that worried about that even. But that is the right to keep and bear arms doesn't say in a public place. I've not read anywhere where it says you get to do that in a restaurant or, you know, wherever you want to. You get to keep and bear them. So defend your property, have a gun at your house, go write a check, buy a gun, bring it home, fine. And my buddy was like, "Well, you can't get a car without a license." This is absolutely not true. I promise you can drive to Woody Anderson Ford or Chevrolet dealership or whatever. And if I have money in an account or I can finance it, I can buy a car. And I could have a rollback go pick it up and take it to my 10-acre farm, and I can drive it around my house and my yard as much as I want to and in the driveway. You know, and I probably should try to not run over my kids and run through my house, but that's kind of up to me. Same thing with a gun. They're both of them can both kill you or be very useful tools. So, but before you can go drive your car on public streets, you have to pass a proficiency test and show that because you are then endangering other people driving a car around, you got to show that you can do that well. I'm a huge fan of that with guns. Before you can sit in a restaurant next to my family with a gun, I believe just like a car, because they're very similar. As I told Claire this when she didn't have a desire to drive a lot and she was 15, and she turned 16 and wanted to get her license to go drive. I'm like, no, I'm not going to give you a loaded gun and say, good luck. You know, I hope you don't kill anybody. I need to know that you're proficient, and I've seen you in scenarios before I turn that over to you. And I think that same thing applies to guns. Before you're allowed to carry it in every restaurant, church, wherever you're going, sitting next to people that probably don't even know you have it, you need to prove that you're proficient with it. And that's been a very controversial argument. It's a take I've heard some people have, but most people are just like, no, you can't infringe on my right to have a gun and carry it where I want. Well, that's necessarily the case because that gets back to the individual liberties. If you bring a gun into a restaurant and sit next to me and you have no training and you grab the wrong end of it or do something stupid and you shoot, you know, me or one of my family members, that's infringing on my liberties. So that's an
Well, you can
interesting one.
push that even to a absurd extreme. People on, okay, I don't have a problem with the Second Amendment, your right to keep and bear arms, but why do you need an AR-15 with a huge mag? Why, you know, you know, you could push that to say, okay, it says to bear arms. It doesn't define what's to keep me from having a pack of C4 with a detonator switch in my hand. I'm bearing arms.
I'm a fan of
Uh,
that too, though. That gets back to almost like free speech. If you want a freaking RPG to carry on your shoulder, I don't care. It's
right.
that because that gets nuanced. We're like, oh, why
How
do you
about
need?
fully automatic?
Don't care.
Why do we stop fully automatic?
We shouldn't. That goes
So,
back. You know why
okay,
that was
and
done? So why
I'm
that was
not
done,
disagreeing.
and the whole
What?
NFA and why that was done, it was strictly a tax, and it's funny because it's still the same dollar value tax today for tax stamps for fully automatic weapons, short barrel rifles, and for silencers. And it was that dollar value was a tax that for the mob and all that they're trying to control them, but fully
Okay.
automatic weapons are not as accurate as any other. You know, everybody's scared of them because they look cool in movies, but again,
Now, one of the things that, although I'm not sure how practical this is in application, but you see it over and over in the platform of the Libertarian Party as it relates to criminal cases. They support restitution to the victim to the fullest degree possible at the expense of the criminal or the negligent wrongdoer. Now, if the wrongdoer is a corporation, that's one thing. The wrongdoer is some guy who's been living on the says nothing. I'm not sure what kind of restitution you're going to get, but it is one of the things that they really, really push. They really don't. The one thing that they also, and I think in this area, I would happen to agree with them, says we assert the common law right of juries to judge not only the facts, but also the justice of the law. We oppose prosecutorial practice of overcharging criminal prosecutions so as to avoid jury trials by intimidating defendants into accepting plea bargains. What they basically say is that practice should be outlawed. You should appear before a jury of your peers. They should not only determine your guilt or innocence, they should determine the penalty
Yeah.
that you pay, as opposed to that being strictly in the purvey of a judge, and that sort of thing. And that's a little bit of a concept. And even now, when in cases where we do allow the juries to make certain determinations as to whether it's the death penalty or life
Mhm.
without the possibility of parole, we've given them very strict guidelines in most instances as to where that has to fall. My understanding of the way the basic libertarian philosophy is that's up to the jury.
Right.
And if the jury decides that in this case that yes, you committed a felony one, but we believe in these circumstances you should be able to go free after 6 months instead of a court man 10 to 15 years, that should be up to the jury. What's your feeling about that? We trust the juries because it appears sometimes we don't.
I think the problem is it's selective. It's not consistent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I I think, man, some of the, and you go back and start looking. This is a whole bunch more podcasts that gets into the prison industrial complex and other things. But some of these mandatory minimums and everything, the history behind them are insane.
Right.
And who's driving that? Well, the prison lobby drives some of it because no matter what, they want to have prisoners because the private prisons make money. Um, yeah, I think I'm not a huge fan of some of these mandatory. I think every case can be looked at on a case by case basis. I think the jury should play a huge role in that. I think it should be collaborative between the judge, but I just, you see it with statutory rape sometimes, where especially when it's a, 17 or 18-year-old high school student and a 15-year-old high school student, and you've seen, athletic careers and other things ruined and lives ruined over consensual things between two high school students. But then
Right.
there's a mandatory minimum that's got to happen. I'm like, man, that doesn't feel like what that was the intent of that. And I think that's the problem with
Yeah.
some of the mandatories apply to scenarios that it doesn't feel like they should be. So I also
Well, there
don't
are
know that
still
if I
people.
believe trusting a jury fully makes what some of these juries look like how they
Well,
get
it should
picked,
be a
and
jury of your peers, though. If it's
should be,
12
should
people,
be, yeah.
there are still people serving life sentences in the state of Texas for marijuana
Oh,
possession.
it's
So,
so there's a movie documentary that's out right now, and the guy who did it was on Rogan recently. It's called the Project, and Alabama, Mississippi should be happy because we're last in this one. Alabama has got the worst. Steve Marshall, Kay Ivey, some of the things they've said, how prisoners are treated, the whole mafia that's the prison guard system. I mean, it is bad, and they did a really good job of documenting this. They did it under the guise of going in a prison ministry at the started. And then it was kind of
uh-huh,
accidental how it, the prison guards cell phones to inmates in prison, and then they're able to start doing things and feeding this guy stuff. But it does not paint Alabama, and Alabama was just one of them. But Alabama was really bad when you start looking at the prison system and how that's going. And again, a lot of the reason that the marijuana laws are still what they are is because it puts people in prison, and then you got somebody in jail for marijuana for 20 years and then they end up getting killed. I mean, it's a bad scenario that needs to be looked at. So,
right. The other thing that I found interesting in here, and once again, but they support the abolition of what we refer to immunity so that law enforcement and prosecutors would be accountable for misconduct that leads to wrongful convictions or other acts of injustice. So if it's intentional, I did not realize that there was, a qualified immunity, what that entails. Um, if law enforcement, a member of law enforcement, member of the judiciary, uh, is in any way guilty of that leads to a wrongful conviction, there should be a price to pay.
Yeah.
And evidently, under some circumstances, there's not. I don't understand
Yeah.
the legal ramifications or the guidelines in that.
I think I understand the intent of what they're trying to do. I think it gets abused and is taken too far. If it's in, there's some things around that. I think the intent was to protect law enforcement and other people, but I think it gets used again. There because the problem is when you look at a good example of that. Think about this one. The what's her name, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. There was a FBI sting operation where they took down a group of people who were going to kidnap her. This has been 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was. Um, well, what what's really intriguing, and it gets into even the January 6th thing. How many federal plants were in that crowd? A lot, and it's very well documented. Well, that case in Michigan, there were two idiots who were talking about and online and other things at the nudging of federal officers. Well, the federal agents, there were like 12 of them involved in this little group that was created and two idiots. At what point is it critical mass of whose idea it was? And I
Right.
think that's where I think that's the libertarians, view of that's definitely wrong. The qualified
Right.
immunity for police officers doing the right thing, but there's some level in there where when there's 10 or 12 federal officers and two morons in a chat room, and then all them are trying to kidnap the governor of Michigan, like that seems silliness.
Well, and it's once again, now we've got to define what do they mean by misconduct
That's right.
and at what level, that
Yep.
sort of thing. We won't go into this here. We'll just mention it. The Libertarian Party is opposed to the administration of the death penalty in all
That's
states under
three
all
more
circumstances.
podcasts. Yeah.
Yeah. And then this last one is the defense. And they believe that the only legitimate use of force is in defense of your individual rights, your life, your liberty, and your justly acquired property against aggression. This adheres to the individual who may be aided by another individual or group in order to defend himself against this aggression.
Yeah.
We affirm the individual right recognized by the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms, and we oppose the prosecution of individuals for exercising their rights of self defense. Now, this one is interesting. Private property owners should be free to establish their own conditions regarding the presence on their own property. In other words, the government cannot tell what personal defense weapons you may have on your property. That's not the government's purvey, in their
Yeah.
opinion.
That's
We
similar to what I was
oppose
saying
all
earlier.
laws.
Yeah.
Yeah. We oppose all laws at any level of government restricting, registering, or monitoring the ownership, manufacture, or transfer of firearms, ammunition, or firearm accessories. The only thing that might be, they really don't mention having to take a course and be
Yeah.
certified. And I don't know if that's hidden
I think
somewhere
they're
in this
I think
language
it
or
would be
not.
open for discussion. I mean, and they would probably say you're
Yeah.
trying to regulate it. Again, if you're trying to
Mhm.
regulate it and tell people they can't, that's one thing, but nobody's telling people they can't drive cars. Again, if it were
Right.
treated like licenses to drive cars, I don't think it would be a big issue. I think one thing that's intriguing in there though, and I think this is where it gets to be a real issue, and there's some states right now that are trying to outlaw Glocks because you can put a Glock switch on it, make it fully automatic, then it's scary trying to do. I think
Right.
the unique thing about the United States, and it's where right now the UK is struggling, Australia is struggling, New Zealand's struggling. A lot of these places, Ireland, where they took away guns or they don't have guns, boy, it's a big barrier to the government taking over everything and fully going tyrannical and taking over. And I think people who want more power keep trying to chip away because there's one thing that separates this country from everybody else. It's about 400 million guns. And,
Right.
you don't ever want it to get to that, but there is a deterrent to that. And I hear what everybody says, and Joe Biden said it. Well, you can't fight, an F-15 with an AR-15. I know the people that fly the F-15s, they're not going to fight us. They won't be on the side of
Right.
the government versus that's a stupid argument. It is a definite balance of power. The Second Amendment was not put in place for shooting targets or hunting. It was put in place to keep a tyrannical government from taking over the people. And
Right.
so I
Right.
think you got to look at that, and it's kind of like free speech. It means everything, every gun. And people are like, oh, well, they meant muskets because that's what they had. No, it was actually meant to be on par with whatever the government had, because that was the whole reason,
Right.
again, to keep the
Right.
government from infringing on our rights. So I agree, and that's where the registries and all that stuff is. A lot of the laws around guns and what they're doing, and this is a pretty easy thing to defend. I've had this debate with people. AR-15s is a good one. It's a bad, ugly looking gun. Well, if you look at, and people don't like humans, but go look at the number of murders that are committed every year in this country. And I used to have the data. I could have gotten it. It's pretty easy to go find. The number of people that are murdered by given weapons, the number of people killed by blunt objects, hand sticks, is much higher than AR-15s every year. Same thing with knives. That's a big scary one. It's also one that if you really wanted to try to fight the government, that'd probably be one you would pick. If you want to defend your property, it's a pretty good one to pick.
Right.
Um, but people, we're saving lives. They're killing a bunch of people. No, handguns are. Handguns in Chicago kill more people than anybody. They know that's a bridge that's really hard to go, although they're starting to try to do that to specific kind of handguns of what you're going to do. Um, but again, that's, to me, there's a reason the Second Amendment's there, and it's not for hunting, and it's not for target shooting, and it's not for sport. It's for and it always, when you look at it, the people that erode that right, you got to look at it and say, why? Because you don't have any
Right.
statistics to back up why you're doing it. The guns you're going after
Right.
are not killing a bunch of people every year at all.
Right. Right. Well, listen, that got us through platform one, and
Yeah.
we may do a couple of more of these. The next platform is on economic liberty.
Yeah.
And I think maybe next week we look at that one. Then we will also release the information next about our special guest who's going to be
Awesome.
joining us 2 weeks out. And we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I
In the
love it.
meantime,
I've got
the,
some things too that after we talk about the next platforms of how could we do this, because just trying to enact their platforms, I think it's just yelling at the wind.
oh, no,
And I
I
think
agree with you. And
I
I've
think
got
there are
some
some
ideas.
yeah, I think there's some triggers that we can talk about that would
There's some pathways for
there are.
some of this.
And they're not
Perhaps,
as hard
that,
as Constitutional Convention of States and all that.
right.
There's some pretty simple things that could be done to actually get there. So, no, I
Right.
agree. Good stuff. I like we
Yeah.
said coming into this one it wouldn't take long, and we didn't make it through. We're an hour and a half in, so there's more to come. It's
Right.
good.
Well, we've got a U.S. soccer match going on right now, so
That's
we
right.
probably should get there and cheer that on. But
I like it.
I'm looking forward to it, and looking forward to next week. We'll
Yeah.
just continue this on.
Yeah.
And all right,
Sounds
thanks,
good.
man. It's been
Enjoyed it.
great. Enjoyed it.
Yes,
We'll
sir.
talk to you
Go
later.
USA.
You got it.